The fact-finding mission was established by the Human Rights Council to document whether some of the alleged human rights violations that touched on the rights of women to equality, extrajudicial executions, internet shutdowns, enforced disappearances, violations of due process and fair trial, access to justice and remedies, were actually documenting and whether those patterns of violations and those incidents had occurred. Everything started with the response of the state to Gina Mahsa Amini and her detention by the morality police, and then the subsequent protests that led to a very strong, brutal, repressive response by the government in dealing with the protests. Our plan was to check the facts and go wherever the facts and the documentation would take us. We thought that we would be able to establish a fruitful collaboration with the government because we are a group of independent experts. We wanted to go and visit Iran and interview witnesses and experts and visit the prisons, talk to family members, journalists, lawyers, but we were not able to enter the country. We sent several requests and letters and then detailed letters asking for specific information to the government to no avail. We carried on our investigations, reaching out through public calls for submissions and doing interviews with victims and witnesses so as to create a wealth of documentation that would allow us to analyze patterns and incidents and structures that are relevant to establishing what happened to Gina Mahsa and what happened in the context of the protests and what is the response of the government to the claims for truth, justice, and reparations. When we started looking at the documentation and the massive amounts of videos and testimonies, we were able to establish not only the use of lethal weapons in the response, but also some instances of targeted shootings with lethal weapons, but also with non-lethal weapons, but that were used to create lasting injury. And that is the case of some of the victims that we interviewed and the cases that we documented where they went for the eyes of victims at very close range. There was also blinding caused by pellets, by shooting at the face of a person with metal pellets that creates a high risk of lasting damage to the face, but also injury to the eyes. And we have documented that as one of the practices of security forces in dealing with protesters. One story that stayed with me is the cruelty that I've seen in bargaining with the bodies of the dead. That those situations in which family members were told that they wouldn't give them the bodies of those that were killed back if they didn't say that they had died in different circumstances, and they wouldn't allow them to perform their funeral rites or do their commemoration, is so incredibly cruel. And there's something about mourning, about respecting the lives of people, but also the space for honoring the dead, that is pretty shocking to me. Another story that has been very shocking for me is the stories of gang rapes and rapes with objects to women and girls. That is always horrifying as a woman to listen to, and is very terrifying to know that has happened to many women and some men, and knowing the consequences that those types of torture have physically as well as psychologically is difficult to overcome. That pain and that lasting harm that torture leaves on people. So I hope that the international community takes significant steps as well to make sure that those that have suffered torture and that those that have suffered sexual torture have the necessary medical treatments and psychological rehabilitation, and are given humanitarian visas. We think that we have established that there was a systemic use of blindings, and we believe that that might be a way of branding people and being able to create lasting harm, terrorize the protesters for the consequences of protesting and losing your sight, and also to identify them later. We have documented many cases of the use of sexual violence against protesters, and we have documented systematic torture against protesters, including sexual violence. We would like the findings of this fact-finding mission to provide enough information and analysis for the Human Rights Council so that the Council can act in order to secure that victims have their rights protected. We also would like victims to know that they do have rights. They have a right to truth, to equality, to justice, to accountability, to reparations, and that those should be protected. The report says it very clearly, and we hope that the government takes note of that and takes steps in order to address their international obligations under international human rights law, under the treaties that they have ratified, under customary international law. And if they don't, that the international community also takes steps to ensure that crimes against humanity have an appropriate response. Fact-finding missions can have an important role in transitional justice. They can bring elements of truth to the community, to the Iranian society and the international community, to establish the facts of what happened and contribute to understanding not only the facts but also the causes and consequences of the facts that the fact-finding mission has established. So not only describing the human rights violations that happen, but also understanding the multi-layered institutionalized system of discrimination that is supported by violence that we found in Iran, and the consequences that that has for Iranian society as a whole, but also for women in Iran in the protection of their rights and their possibility of walking the streets freely and being able to choose whether they wear or not wear a hijab, and go to school and go to work without any fear of reprisals for how they dress or what they say or where they sing or dance. I've represented many victims of gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity from Latin America before the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, in cases that talk about the right to truth, justice, reparations, cases dealing with the use of rape as a tool of war and the chilling effect that has on freedom of expression. So in that work, I find many parallels with the claims for truth and justice and mourning and reparations that victims have in Iran. Witnesses and victims, but also journalists and lawyers are constantly asking for the same things that the people that I represent are asking for in Latin America.